Good afternoon, everyone. Really thank you for joining us. My name is Felicity Lawrence and I manage C-suite programs at the University of Auckland Business School in executive education. And I'll be hosting this event today. Now, some of you may have been to our other webinars, and today is slightly different from usual as we are seeking to give you a kind of a micro experience of what it's like to be part of our senior leadership programs. And so therefore people seeking to move to senior roles, CIO, CFO, senior HR and senior supply chain roles. We can always talk about that later. We have on the call 5 senior leaders drawn from each of our 4 C-suite advisory groups. Now, our advisory group members are absolutely wonderful people that you'll see who will work with us through the year to help us redesign and evolve and add things to these programs. Should you participate in one of these programs, and there are several alumni who are actually here on the call today, you'll meet advisory group members in various guises. They speak on programs, they hold site visits, they mentor participants, they sponsor participants and are panel members in our end of program project presentations, which is sometimes grueling but always fascinating. They contribute this time freely, and their motivation comes from knowing that together we're doing our bit to build capability across organisations and industries for the betterment of New Zealand Inc. So even though it might feel that way, and we want you to feel that way in a C-suite program, it's actually for the building capability for New Zealand Inc. The advisory group members are integral to our ability to deliver value. So I'm going to welcome onto the call, thank you very much for being here, Deena Clarkson, General Manager Distribution New Zealand for Fonterra. She's on our Strategic Supply Chain Advisory Group. Chris Jewell, who's the CFO of Genesis Energy. He's a Strategic CFO Advisory Group member. Simon Kennedy, CDO, Foodstuffs North Island from the Strategic CIO program. Jennifer Seppel, who's CDO of Air New Zealand and on the Strategic CIO program, or rather not on the program, the advisory group. And Richard Waggott, who's Deputy Chief Executive at the Department of Corrections, and he's on the People Strategy Advisory Group. In the interest of time, I won't go into any details about their exploits and their bios, but perhaps they might give us a 30-second overview of their role before they talk with us about the opportunities that you see emerging for New Zealand as we move toward 2021. I have asked each of you to speak from your executive and industry perspective, but please don't be constrained by that view. Each one of you comes from an organisation that has a very different experience over the last 4 months. And I've asked the speakers not to dwell on COVID-19, but no doubt that will have informed their thinking. Okay, this call is set for an hour, and I have no doubt that the conversation will be lively. I've asked each guest to speak for a measly 5 to 7 minutes, probably closer to 5 than 7 come to think of it, but we'll see. And then we'll go to questions from you, the audience. If you have questions, please put them in the chat function, as I'm sure you're well versed in doing. And if you have a specific question for a specific person, could you also tell us who that person is? If it's a general question, I'll just throw it out to volunteers. If we don't get through all of the questions, I'll arrange for them to be answered otherwise and referred back to you. Okay, the conversation will be recorded and be shared to you or people who haven't been able to get here today this week. So, right, I'm going to start with you, Simon Kennedy. As Foodstuffs has been a company who's very close to our hearts and our stomachs over the last few months, and other places too probably, we're wondering how the world is looking from your perspective and what opportunities are emerging that you may not have expected. So I'll throw it over to you, Simon.
Okay, yeah, thanks Felicity, and thanks for having me on. Good to be here with, I see over 100 people on the call, so that's excellent. Yeah, and look, the 30-second bio I'll do in 10 seconds. You know, I look after the people that look after all of the technology in Foodstuffs North Island. So whether that's the enterprise type stuff or the customer facing type stuff, it's across all that. Look, I think I'd probably start by just acknowledging the privilege we've had to trade, you know, through all alert levels. And at times, you know, we've been dealing with the positive problem of increased levels of demand in many parts of the business. And for sure, we've faced huge pressures and challenges. You know, the panic buying, scaling to meet demand, keeping the supply chain going, inventing distance retail kind of on the fly. But nonetheless, you know, we recognise we're in an enviable position compared with many sectors. So, you know, where to from here? Looking into next year, I think I'd probably characterise my outlook as sort of medium-term realist, long-term optimist. I think, you know, realist because, like everyone else, we face the same uncertain outlook. Where the thing that is most uncertain, frankly, is, you know, how long and in what shape the recession lasts. You know, not whether there's going to be one or not. The health aspect of this crisis isn't necessarily over for New Zealand. It's looking good that it is, but there's no guarantee on that, given the worsening situation in many parts of the world, and considering the sort of the practical challenges involved in isolation at the border. I think New Zealand is still only now really working through the early stages of the economic impact. You know, as those short-term relief measures come away for businesses, we'll find out how that translates through to sort of longer-term impact on households. So for us, you know, we know our customers face some challenging times, and we need to be there for them, providing value in our, you know, retail and wholesale banners. Yeah, customers of all demographics, they seek value at all times. That's for sure. But the mix of what represents that value, you know, changes with economic context. So we need to try and be ahead of that and not chasing it. So that's some sort of reasons to be a realist in medium term. But I think I've got sort of a long-term optimism because, you know, the most certainly helps, of course, but New Zealand so far does seem to have managed through the pandemic better than most. You know, so our focus now can be largely on the economic recovery from here on, you know, even as we continue to work hard to you know, contain the health aspects of the crisis. And that puts us in a better position to take some of the positive opportunities on offer. You know, it's a positive, I think, that businesses will become necessarily lean through this experience. I think we'll see a permanent uptick in personal productivity in many sectors. And that's thanks largely to, you know, the 6-week digital boot camp that was the lockdown experience. Yeah, we've all seen a great demonstration of our kind of collective resilience and adaptability. You know, leadership, I think, both nationally and within business has been clear and uncomplicated. And so through whatever mix it is of our kind of size, culture, social structures, New Zealand's been good at getting on with it and people playing their part. So those are, you know, that's kind of what's driving this sort of long-term optimistic outlook. I can't recognise those are all fairly broad things. So to bring it more specifically to Foodstuffs, I think something that comes to mind in terms of a, you know, opportunity and challenge for us is around speed of decision making and execution. You know, we're not alone, I know, in recognising that our decision making and outright pace accelerated through the crisis. You know, and that was a contributor to our effectiveness in the response. And so the obvious question is, well, how do we retain that speed and that speed of decision making as we move into a more sort of sustainable environment? And I think it's tempting to have an answer that just says, well, just make faster decisions, right? Just carry on making those decisions. And I think that tends to take you down the route of wanting to stop some unhelpful stuff. You know, stop second guessing opinions, stop waiting for consensus, stop you know, playing out of position or worrying about failure. And there's probably some truth to all of that, but I think it misses a little bit, or underplays the essential difference, I think, that's in the mix during a crisis event, which is that however, you know, unpredictable the next day is, or however fast events unfold, or however unclear the solution might be to a given problem, the overall mission is super clear, right? So in our context, that was maintain safety and health of our team and customers, continue trading, and maintain supply of essential products. So it's from that clarity of mission that those other outcomes, derive. The unhelpful behaviours fall away. So, who knows if we made the best possible decisions in recent months, but we made them, and then we made the best of them without cause for kind of re-litigation or regret. So I think the challenge I see is to get increasingly clear in setting the mission, without the helpful, but frankly not particularly fun or sustainable backdrop of a global crisis. So I guess looking, in summary, looking ahead, I hope we are realistic about the extent of the challenge ahead. I know for sure we're motivated to continue to support our customers well, and our whole strategy depends on that. And I think there's cause for longer term optimism based both on New Zealand's position in the world, but also the ability of both private and public sectors and kind of Kiwis generally to find a way to adapt, evolve, work together and stay strong. So, by doing so, we'll continue to make the priority calls, continue to strengthen and protect our supply chain, and deliver on our customer promises. And that hope will put us in good stead.
Thanks, Simon. There was some really good points around there, and that whole issue of how people relate to each other and consensus decision making, and also some of the people stuff around it is really interesting. But of course, you said supply chains, and I know a few of us are actually very, very keen on how supply chains function. Deena, you're from Fonterra and responsible for all of the distribution centres in New Zealand. How has things been from you? Again, it's sort of part of the winning team really in Fonterra, since everybody sort of likes to continue to eat dairy and what have you. What have you seen, and what are you thinking, or how are you thinking that sort of the company might change, emerge, respond to opportunities and challenges for the next coming years?
Yeah, thanks, Felicity. Hi, everyone. And just listening to a little bit of Simon's feedback is very similar to the experience Fonterra had through the COVID period. Like many businesses, we were also privileged to operate as an essential business, given our reliance and dependency on collecting milk off farm, processing that through to our global customers. And just to give a bit of context in Fonterra, through our peak export packing, we're moving a container every 3 minutes to our 120 markets in the world. So there was a huge reliance on supply chain functioning effectively in New Zealand to ensure that we could support our farming community, maintain good employment for our workforce, and also service customers globally who were also very similarly going through a COVID pandemic themselves. The process for our supply chain was interesting. It felt to me an incredibly seamless process, and I think that's a credit to a couple of areas of our business which we've reflected on. One is the capability of our people. We really truly saw our leaders step up and shine. We saw our essential workers, that being our waged employees in the operation, processing milk, driving forklifts, really commit to working through a high risk period. And we also saw a lot of our global markets through ocean freighting customers continue to rely on the organisation, which is incredibly important to New Zealand Inc. Some of the insights that we've reflected on through that period has been stress testing our business continuity plans. That came on fairly quickly. I would really encourage any organisation to stress test that and test it well in advance of any future pandemics that may arise again. Ensure that you do have continuity plans in place and contingencies that you can draw on. What that will lead into is organisations like ours and many in New Zealand managing costs incredibly tightly. That stock holding needs to be considered differently if we are in another situation where we have to hunker down or markets globally change in a really dynamic way. Stock and supply of stock will be even more important if the disruption through supply chain continues to occur. One of the key areas of focus, which I do focus heavily on in our organisation, Simon touched on it, was the care and well-being of people. And we shouldn't underestimate the impact of moving people from an office environment, a factory, a warehouse, and asking them to work from home during that period. The dynamic of that, managing incredibly busy roles, home life, children, daycare, schooling, that was a real focus for us through that period, and I think something that we will pick up more broadly going forward in regard to the wellness and the care of people through that period. I liked Simon's commentary around digital boot camp, because our IT system in Fonterra is generally very reliable, but it was certainly put under enormous pressure, both in risk. So we saw a higher level of activity around potential people trying to break the firewall. We also saw people who weren't au fait with establishing IT in their office setup at home in a way that maintained a good safety performance and also reliability to perform effectively in role. So that's certainly some areas we're going to pick up more broadly in the future. So I think if I was to sort of look back on the event and some of the learnings that we will consider in the future, it probably wraps up into 3 T's, I'll call it. One is testing our technology, because of the dependency digital is placing heavily on our ability to be productive in different working environments, and also our supply chain. Trust our people. We saw some incredibly proud moments in the business that we will look back on favourably, around people who very, very proudly turned up for work every day, while other people were put in isolation due to immune compromised reasons. And the last T is really just test your systems, test your contingency, and test your plans, ensuring that the rigour exists, the processes are in place, and people can seamlessly move from different working environments to react to events like we're seeing globally. So yeah, we've come out the other end. A few of us have got a few more scars on our back. We're a lot more resilient. But overall, as Miles has often said in the public arena, we're incredibly proud of what we've achieved. Not just the reliance that we have for supporting New Zealand farming communities, but also our continuity of supply to our global customers. So we're absolutely thrilled with how our teams performed through that period, our systems. But of course, there will be some learnings we can take away and future-proof in regard to some of the event findings. Thanks, Felicity.
Thank you, Deena. Yeah, there's some questions starting to come up around that. Chris, you're the energy guy, the one that keeps everything going, on which we all sort of, bow. What have you seen, and what are you thinking that's going to sort of shift and change over the next few years?
Very good. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. We've banned COVID from our lingo, and I'm going to talk about the forward-looking perspective. But similar experiences to Deena and Simon as well, around people and trust and keeping the lights on for us. So I'll look forward a little bit. So one of the challenges we're focused on is the energy trilemma. And this isn't new, this has been around a long time. The energy trilemma, in the energy sector, we try to deliver an energy sector that's low carbon, low cost, and highly reliable. We often describe that as the energy trilemma. And the question is, there's been a bit of talk about the green recovery and some massive infrastructure investment. How do we focus the green recovery and massive infrastructure investment on continuing to deliver on the energy trilemma? I'll just remind us where we're at from an energy sector. So New Zealand, or the electricity sector, is 85% renewable today. Now we could get to 90 to 95%, but New Zealand is blessed with massive investment and foresight of our forebears in the hydro system. There's only 2 countries in the world that are more renewable than New Zealand is today. We've got world-class geothermal fields. We're a windy country, and it actually is reasonably sunny here too. So thick on the renewables, we're looking pretty good. Reliability, don't know about you guys, but I can't remember the last time we've had a reliability issue. We've never seen those big grid failures that you saw in the US. Everyone would have seen those charts where you saw the lights go out in the US. So New Zealand, highly reliable system. And then on the third leg, cost. So New Zealand ranks 10th out of the 30 OECD countries, 10th lowest cost out of 30. So pretty good on cost. and we're actually about 20% below average cost in terms of energy production and energy delivery in the OECD countries. So on that trilemma, we're pretty good. So in many cases, it's, it's don't stuff it up. But I think the opportunity for the electricity sector is how do we use that electricity sector to decarbonise the energy sector. So just to put it in context, in terms of total carbon emissions in New Zealand, the electricity sector contributes 5% of total carbon emissions. Agriculture is around 40%, and transport and heavy industry is about 60%. Now, New Zealand has, the question is, how do we use our highly renewable, reliable, low-cost electricity to decarbonise other sectors? And I mean, I go around the world regularly talking to our investors. We've got 55,000 investors, a bunch of them around the world. And I've got to tell you, New Zealand is the envy of the world in terms of our electricity sector. And New Zealand has one of the best opportunities in the world to decarbonise its energy sector and, and really lead the world in terms of low carbon outcomes. So if you think about where carbon comes from, transport, I mentioned a big component of carbon emissions is transport. Vast majority of vehicles on the roads could be EVs, could be electric vehicles. Heavy transport and trains, that could be hydrogen driven mode of transport, and hydrogen is generated through electricity. Industrial heating, so it was interesting hearing Deena talk earlier. Industrial heating, largely wood, milk, processing. Boilers under 150 degrees could also be electric, and I know Fonterra and both Synlait have been putting electric boilers in. And the last one, agriculture, that's a little bit more challenging to use the energy sector, but I think science and maybe consumer preferences will solve, help to solve emissions from the agriculture sector. So the question is, me saying New Zealand's the envy of the world and I think we could be a world leader, what's stopping it? The challenges, as I see, there's three things. One, the availability of the transmission grid. So in New Zealand, we run a user pays system for transmission for building out new infrastructure. So to put that in context, and I'm an Aucklander, so the Puhoi to Wellsford road that we're all looking forward to in Auckland, the corollary here is the first person who drives down that has to pay for it, has to pay for the whole lot. And that's the way the transmission system works. So the first person to connect a wind farm in a new area or connect a boiler, if the grid doesn't exist, the first person has to pay for it. So I think that's one of the challenges of the opportunity. The second one is the Resource Management Act. It's expensive, takes a long time, there's no certainty of outcomes. Anyone who's anyone can have a say and stick their oar in and slow it down. And I know the government are focused on thinking about that. The third one is electric vehicles. They're high cost for any of you who are thinking about it. Whilst it might make economic sense, the capital cost up front is still a hurdle. The performance exists; they're as good as other cars, and other vehicles, but the high cost up front is a challenge. So, from a Genesis perspective, our challenge is to make sure the regulators, the policy makers, understand these barriers and have policies and programs that deal with the real issues rather than what the emotive issues are, or rather than things that might win you an election. So rather than the populist kind of issues. And the second thing I think is the other challenge we've got is to help New Zealanders understand that the electricity sector is a solution to carbon. The carbon opportunity, or decarbonising the energy sector, and not just take it as the easy target to take the last 5% of carbon out of the electricity sector at the detriment of using the electricity sector to decarbonise the energy sector. Because if you try and take the last 5% of carbon out of the electricity sector, I can tell you, you won't have a reliable electricity system. You won't have a currently low cost electricity system that it is today, and you'll miss the opportunity to decarbonise the energy sector and go after the 100 odd million tonnes of carbon that New Zealand emits a year. So forward looking for us, that's what we're thinking about.
Just a few small things for a little place like this in the middle of nowhere. But you're right, the envy of the world in a lot of other ways. Thanks very much, Chris. I'll come back to you about some of those questions in a minute. Now, Richard, you're a bit of an outlier in this group to a certain extent, aren't you? You come from corrections, and I bet not many of us actually really think too much about corrections unless we have, you know, sort of people that we know involved in it for some reason. The interesting thing about what you're doing is that you're doing quite a lot of strategy work, aren't you? And there's some quite different approaches that you've already put in place, but also thinking about that for 2021 and beyond. So to give us a bit of an idea of what the experience has been for, you know, people in corrections, and also what some of that thinking actually is. Please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Felicity. So, kia ora koutou. I'm Richard Waggott, the Deputy Executive at Corrections, and I suppose that means looking after the 10,000 people who are on a prison sentence today in New Zealand, and the 30,000 on community-based sentences as well. So as you can imagine, corrections or prisons in particular are kind of quite a hotbed for rapid spread of things like COVID-19. It's been fairly full on to manage that. And the other challenge in the environment is it's probably got the largest group of vulnerable with underlying health conditions. So around the world, correction systems have been really struggling with COVID. So for example, 85,000 cases in prisons in the comparable countries we'd look to, 1,500 deaths, and much higher rates of infection and death amongst workforces, people who work in prisons. So we've got 10,000 FTE, so it's been a pretty big kind of effort, quite an anxious environment. And as we've seen overseas, anxious prisoners leads to tension, leads to assaults, and we saw in other countries a range of riots and so that led us to our strategy around, it wasn't from the rest of the country, keep COVID out of prison. And we did have some benefits around, I suppose, having borders similar to New Zealand. But we made some early kind of strategic decisions at the exec table, which was to really focus on where we're going as an organisation to try and change the multi-generational nature of what a correction system is in a country like New Zealand. And so this was a big opportunity for us to really lean in and take a health-led approach, which is often the lesser told story around what a correction system is here. And also really dialing up centric approaches. So as you can imagine, the amount of anxiety, people think, but the people in prison have full access to TV and to media and to newspapers, and they can see what's coming, but they're very much beyond their control about what's families and whānau and their children, and have very little ability to do anything about it. So
okay, cool. Okay, Jennifer, over to you. Now, the thing about your role is that, one, you are the CDO of Air New Zealand, and Air New Zealand, I think, is very, you'll be pleased to know, probably very dear to our hearts in New Zealand, and it's been appalling to kind of see what's happened. Also, you have global experience, and I know others of you do too, but you're actually current global experience and, you know, sort of with banks, etc. So just, can you talk a bit about that and, you know, what you're seeing and the sort of New Zealand in that global context, as well as what's happening within New Zealand?
Yes, for sure. Thanks for having me, Felicity. It's great to be here with everybody today. Yeah, as you know, it hit Air New Zealand really hard, this whole COVID thing, from $6 billion down to just about nothing in revenue, and 18 million customers a year down to about a few thousand a day. So it was really dramatic. And I think one of the things that has helped us through this period so far is that our CEO came out with a vision, and I'm sure you've heard about it, about his 800-day plan for survive, revive, and thrive. And we are dead in the middle of survive phase. And basically what it means for us is reducing 4,000 people in our company, grounding our wide body fleet, reducing executive roles for some of my peers and some of our leadership. And we're still in the middle of it. We have a second phase that we're going into for another $150 million. We expect that we'll be in a survive mode, the survive phase, by September. And I can tell you that what this has really meant for us, for many of the leaders in our company, for most of them, is a real test of leadership. You have to have empathy for people and customers, and at the same time be flexible and adaptive yourself. And at the same time, your teams need you to be strong. So it's really the test of leadership. I think we would all agree in this kind of scenario. What we've noticed is domestic flights are up, probably more than we thought they would. What turns out that New Zealanders, Kiwis want to visit New Zealand. And because we're kind of in this bubble, it's a perfect opportunity. So we have a lot of flights domestically, but even that is not enough to help us financially to get back on our feet. And so what we're expecting in this revive phase, hopefully in September, is that we'll be flying to Australia, maybe Pacific Islands. And so that'll improve our situation. What this whole phase has meant for us is really just looking at new ways of working, just like everybody else has mentioned, but also opened up our customers' eyes on how they could be doing things differently too. So they're more open to digital. And so you will hear our CEO talk frequently about how he wants us to be a digital company, thinking digitally, everybody. And so we're headed that direction, which is a great opportunity for my team and from a digital perspective, but also an opportunity for us to look at simplification of how we do things, automate our processes, and spend this time getting ready in this survive mode for strategic planning for what we're going to do differently going forward. And so even though it's been tragic to the business and losing a lot of our people, at the same time, it's this huge opportunity for us to think about how are we going to operate as a small airline for a while and prepare to grow into eventually flying internationally within the next year and a half. So we were concerned about the recession, just like you were talking about, Simon, and we're actually really pleased to see how many people really want to go down to Queenstown and spend a little bit of time and just take a break because of all the pressure. I have to say that the Kiwi people, they are so kind to us because we've had challenges, as you know, with our refunds and redemption. And there's just a lot of support for the company and helping us as we work through the issues of getting that done. Some of it has been a lesson for us in learning that we need to invest more in our digital platforms so that we can get to that data faster. And some of it is just pure financial constraint on trying to keep our company alive right now. So the patience has been just amazing. For us, a digital airline is going to mean that our customers feel like we're traveling with them every step of the way, that they feel like we know them and understand them, that they can self-service and take care of themselves along the journey. So they're not always having to call up and talk to somebody. They can just get fast results. And so it really has changed the mindset of our entire company about how we work as a smaller team, as a smaller airline. And what we've really been focusing on is, wow, isn't this a great time for us to be able to do innovation and proof of concepts as a smaller company, and then we can scale that as we get larger. So it's really interesting. This survive, revive, and thrive has put us in a mindset of not just focusing on that survival mode right now, which is really easy to do, but to really get the whole company backing this bright future that we think is coming our way.
Right. Thanks very much, Jennifer. It's I think that's the sort of the challenge is how do you focus on the sort of the immediate, but also keep your eyes on where is it we're heading, because in fact that's probably the most important thing in it. You have to do both at the same time.
Exactly.
Is that I mean, we've been harping on about future of work for a long time, and it's kind of slammed into us in the most, sort of powerful way. I might just open a sort of, for all of you, and knowing that some of you are CIOs, CDOs, has that become a sort of like the awareness of it, and has it increased the plans that all of you have? And Richard, I'll come back to you too, because I know that's part of your story as well. Has that increased the sort of the focus on automation and digitization? Is it, you know, if something's going to happen, that's where it's going to happen? Chris, is that a case with you, or Deena? Just take it away. Chris first.
I don't, people probably saw that meme, you know, what's the quickest way to digitize your organization? And it was throw in COVID-19.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, we've had some of that too. I run back office functions of payroll and accounts payable, and like the week before COVID hit, payroll was still a ream full of paper every month, and 3 months later, that's all digital. So, the question we often ask ourselves is, how do you continue to create the crisis, to create the change, the rapid change that you need? And I don't have the answer on that, but it's a great question to ask yourself that, because I think in times of crises, you do make rapid, enduring change. And yes, someone might have mentioned earlier, it might have been you, Deena, that it creates other risks when you make rapid change, but you've got to weigh up, you know, are those risks, you're prepared to take those risks? And I think in many cases you are. Create the change and then deal with the risks later.
Yeah, and there's some risks around that too. Deena, what about Fonterra? What's the story in terms of digitalisation and automation? Can't hear you.
Sorry, Felicity. Look, I think it's a big part of our strategy in Fonterra under our healthy business strategy work stream, and we were very fortunate to have some advancement around tools in place already. What we really saw happen during that period was the effectivity of those tools, from Microsoft Teams connectivity, being able to be in an isolated environment, but at the same time function incredibly productively, and sort of have this contact personally with the rest of your team. That was a really important part of keeping the wheels moving, so to speak, but also the culture that we wanted to build around flexible working, ways of working, but also ensuring that we were really clear on delivering the business objectives at the same time. So I think, like many of the speakers today, we have really driven hard our investment around digital tools and technology. Not everything can be digitized. You know, loading a container, there'll be aspects that still rely on a human driving a forklift. But certainly a big part of COVID was our reliance and dependency on technology through that period. And by all accounts, it was incredibly reliant for us, and I think that's a huge credit to the investment the organisation's put in.
And Simon, Foodstuffs is actually, I mean, I think you've been into robotics anyway, but is that the case, and is that actually increasing as you come through this and move into the coming years?
Yep. We have a little bit of robotics, not a whole lot more on the way. I mean, look, we're on a significant digital journey ourselves. I like how Jennifer framed it up in terms of traveling with customers every step of the way. Similar for us, right, in terms of digital engagement in our stores, but absolutely everywhere our customers are, and being part of that kind of whole shopping journey from start to finish. So yeah, that's in progress anyway. But I think what's happened in the last few months has been useful, because it's the necessity of work from home, and you know, it went better than I could have possibly hoped in terms of the sort of over one weekend getting 1,000 people out of offices and in their homes. Yeah, you'd have taken a year to plan that if someone had given you it as a challenge. So it's really sort of blown some of the myths of can people actually work more flexibly? Can we do certain types of work in a remote way? It's still I think contextual for me. I think there's some work that absolutely you can do the same or better, remotely and focused, and other things that it makes sense to come together and connect on. There was a question in the chat here around, what about performance management with people wanting to work from home? And I somewhat cheekily said, well, yeah, we'll have to recalibrate and put the performance measures up because everyone's going to be performing better. Yeah, that if we retain the good stuff that's come out of that whole experience, I think we'll be in a good place. And with that, with that increased understanding right through the organization, so then we'll be better placed to make the moves into things like robotics in the supply chain, more robotic process automation in terms of some of the back-end functions. It'll just be a more natural part of everyone's kind of language and understanding. So I see that being kind of really helpful. I mean, people say, oh, the Zoom stuff or whatever is just a veneer on top. Actually, it kind of runs a little deeper than that. It opens people's eyes to what's possible.
Do you think and Jennifer, you might comment on this, do you think we've actually taken a step change in the way that we do work differently, or all of you, based on what you were saying, Simon? A step change, or is it people sort of going to get it to a new normal and start to sort of, kind of get tired or whatever? Do you think we've cracked it in some ways?
For our teams, what we're seeing is people like working from home. Overwhelmingly, when we said, hey, everybody come back, people wanted to stay at home. So what we're doing is, because we do have a mixture, and because there are times where you really do need to come together and just connect, we're trying to ask people to come in a couple days a week, but we're leaving it pretty flexible, just because if they're productive and they feel like they can get more done and they're happy, then it's a win-win for all of us. So our company's taken a pretty relaxed view on that. It went, like Simon here at Air New Zealand, it went really well when we had to work from home. People just went into it, and we were surprised. We thought it was going to be much bigger effort and people are going to have to adapt, but they really love it. I think for us, what we're seeing are some really cool opportunities with our customers too. I mean, they don't want to touch things anymore. So if we can start doing things touchless, and we've been wanting to try some of this stuff, Simon, probably as you know, we've been wanting to do some really innovative things. And people now are in a different mindset to say, wow, maybe I would like a touchless option and not have to, use things or check in my baggage and stuff like that. So I see a lot of opportunity with the change in mindset just of everybody in general in the community, and definitely a change in the way we think of ourselves as a company in the whole ecosystem. So right now we're working on with the government, with all kinds of tourism company, everybody on how do we deal with these issues at the border, and how can we make it easier for people to come and visit. And so it's put us into a new mindset of really being part of a bigger ecosystem here in New Zealand that I think is really powerful.
That's a very interesting point, because New Zealanders, and I think Deena's heard me say this before, that there's 1 or 2 degrees of separation between everybody in New Zealand, but in terms of collaboration, and particularly across the public and private sector, we haven't been that great. And so am I hearing that is actually, again, another one of those sort of step changes, that the ability to actually collaborate across the system, or the ecosystem, as you say, has that been a great benefit to that? Deena, do you want to comment on that too?
Yeah, look, we certainly saw evidence of that through our lockdown period. The dependency we had on our suppliers into the processing sites, but also the dependency we had on supply chain more broadly. And, case in point with Foodstuffs, we had to keep the trucks moving. There was a high expectation that consumers could still purchase product through that period under a controlled environment. The collaboration was even more critical through that period, that we had good communication connections, and that we were able to provide complete transparency on risks on a daily, hourly, weekly basis. So I think that was a real test through the period, and for us worked incredibly well through our haulier network. Yes, we were making some stuff up as we went along, but no one's done this before. So I think, for New Zealand Inc. And where we're placed in the world, we've done incredibly well as a country, but at the same time, we also need to survive through these pandemics because of where we're positioned globally. So critically important, particularly for our organisation being global. and also our farming connections and the dependency it has on the economy.
Yeah, and Felicity, what I would add to that is, you know, sometimes in a crisis like that, there's this new need, like the government, as well as just about everybody, every company is concerned about, you know, digital identity and tracking. And so if we can all come together, us with our customers, everybody with their customers, and contribute, we can create a healthier society. And so this it's become a cause of how can we all come together and help each other.
Yeah, that sounds so very exciting. I think that, you know, everybody will be very encouraged about that. And particularly as you've been through the sort of hard stuff to kind of lead some of those things. Somebody, we're talking about, I think it's Kelly actually, speaking of retaining the good stuff, any thoughts on how to continue to move forward with sustainability? And I know that all of you actually are very big on sustainability, CSR, diversity and so on in the current climate. And some of those things have actually had to, you know, you just had to survive. But any comments about that? From anyone really? Simon.
So, yeah, so you know, yes, absolutely. It's a really important part of. It's important to us, and you know, it's important in its own right. Yeah, across CSR generally, we talk of sort of four pillars to that in our world, and I think with what we've seen recently, the two of those pillars get a little bit stronger for us. So access to healthy, affordable food, you know, that becomes you know, slightly higher profile, as does actually sustainable work. And this kind of draws us back to the sort of future of work type topics. So yeah, in this kind of situation we're in, it's a crowded agenda, right? Because there's a lot that needs to be done. There's opportunity, but there's also responsibility to continue driving strategy. Yeah, I'd say, if anything, we've probably got a sharper focus on those two aspects of our overall CSR program. But that's certainly not to the, you know, detriment of the program overall.
And Chris, you were going to leap in there too, I think.
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, we've got 500,000 customers. I think one of the things that we're thinking about is, you know, you've got a new set of vulnerable customers. So your definition previously of what vulnerability was is changing.
Yeah.
I know the banks are thinking about that. You know, vulnerability might just be that you've lost your job. You know, you've got mental health issues from people being stuck at home with children, trying to balance that with a job through the COVID period. Whereas previously, in the electricity sector, vulnerability was generally medically dependent. So I think you've got to keep evolving that. Yeah, and I think it's interesting seeing New Zealand sort of quite quickly gone back to how life was. I know the roads aren't quite as busy and people are working from home a little bit, but I think it is really important to reflect and try and pick up what are the things that did go really well we want to retain. And because from a sustainability perspective, whether it's travel, whether it's air travel, I'm sorry to say, Jennifer, but my airline bill is down significantly. And I know that's not good news for you guys, but actually it is good generally for New Zealand or for us. And so how do we pick up on you know, I used to fly to Wellington every other week, and not missing it. So how do we capture some of those things? You know? And it's great. It's great that Jennifer and the team are thinking about how do you have a smaller, more profitable, more sustainable business long term. You know. Lots of things, and you've got to pause to reflect and capture.
Yes, there's a question that I want to ask each of you as we close out, because it's 1:54. But there's a question here about what advice would you give to the next wave of leaders coming into C-suite roles over the next little while to be successful, bearing in mind what you've learnt from this situation.
I think maybe I'll go first this time. I think you've got to have a good crisis management system, or crisis response system, and the principles of that is generally that you overreact early, get it under control, and then you can peg back. It's really hard when you're trying to continue to escalate every day, to try and escalate your response. It's a lot easier to over-engineer a response and dial it back as you find that it's not as big as you thought it was going to be. I'd say that whatever crisis you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think go hard, go early. In regard to your controls and the management system needed to actually bring some stability. We learned that very early in the process. We had a couple of COVID cases in my team. And of course, bad news tends to travel a lot quicker than positive news. So we very quickly learned that channel of information, the system that's supporting the comms. I think leaders need to recognise those processes in that framework will provide the clarity for the business, the shareholders, the stakeholders more broadly. So I absolutely agree with the sentiments that's been shared as well in regard to just leaning into the conversations very early and quickly. And as they say, don't let a crisis go to waste. There's always a bit of a silver lining. Felicity, I'm also intrigued looking at some of the questions. There's a heavy emphasis being placed on this work from home environment versus business environment. I think that's going to be an imminent and emerging new challenge for organisations. And we're right in the midst of that at the moment, certainly in the Fonterra business, this building. People have adapted really quickly to working from home, but some people also couldn't wait to get back. The kitchen table wasn't cutting it anymore. But, I think before I hand over to one of the other panel members, the view we have is that you can't underestimate the importance of the personal interactions in the room, the bump meetings, the face contact, the coffee catch-ups. So whilst we will continue to be an employer who provides flexible working, we are very much promoting the need to come back to the office and be part of the teams and the communities that we've created in the business.
Yeah.
That's a really positive message.
Yeah.
I really support that, Deena. I mean, I think I'm picking a number of people on the call will be reasonably early in their career, and it's a part of what creates your own future success is those connections you make and the conversations you have. So don't underestimate the value of those interconnections.
So what's, bearing in mind it's 1:57, what is one thing that each of you has learned through this experience that you're going to continue on? It might have been something that you've already said, but Simon, we'll start with you.
Okay, 5 seconds thinking time. Thanks for that, Felicity.
Pleasure.
Look, leadership in crisis is actually fairly easy, compared to other times, because it's clear and obvious what needs doing, and people are looking for you to lead, and you can step in and do it. The thing to retain through this is how well people worked across the organisation. So they work well within their function, but they work better than usual in terms of reaching across functions to get things done. And I think that would be a key thing to retain.
Cool. Excellent. Okay, Jennifer.
Mute so I wouldn't sneeze or anything. So yeah, I would agree with what Simon's saying. Especially because we're reducing in size, we have to collaborate now. And it just gave us a great example right there in real life that we're more powerful when we all come together and move fast. The other thing is we have this new mindset that our CEO brought in, but it's really come in handy along with this, and that is we want to understand the unvarnished truth about what's going on. Gosh. We want to have honest conversations about what is our reality, what are our technical issues, what are our process issues, what are our people issues, get them on the table and solve them as fast as we can. And it's kind of changed the whole dynamic around here to say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay that, we're going to make this big change in your area, and people are actually want to be a part of it because they know it's the solution to fix it. So
that's huge. That's a really big one. Yeah. And Kiwis are often quite polite, so they don't necessarily want to do that.
Yeah.
Go well. Chris.
I think you might have heard the term culture eats strategy for breakfast. And in a time of a crisis, your ability to deal with it is hugely dependent on the culture. And you've heard everybody everybody talk about how well the team's dealt with it, and there's no surprise because all of the businesses that are represented here have got great, strong cultures, and so that foundational element really, really important.
So one thing for you personally?
Don't underestimate the importance of culture and continuing to build a good culture. And it does get a bit harder when it's a bit remote, but you might have to do it a bit differently.
Right.
You need it.
Now, Richard, will we be able to hear you if you answer that question? He's not on the call. Okay, so don't forget about Richard.
Mine's a little bit different. I would just say trust your people. And it's a bit of a build on the culture piece, but trust your people are just going to do the best they can under the circumstances. I think one of the biggest challenges ahead of us is just supporting people through mental health. It's been mentioned previously. That was a tough time for a lot of people, and we're expecting people to transition back and everything's back to normal. Well, normal didn't work. We've got a new norm now, and I think there will be some reflections for organisations, but as a leadership role, trust your people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very sadly, and we knew this was the case, that it'd be enormously great to hear all of you and to talk to you about all sorts of things from, sort of finances and the likelihood of being able to fly as quickly as possible and culture. But I'd like to thank you all very much for being part of this conversation, or as much of the conversation as Zoom can help us, can enable us. And thank you very much for those of you who've taken the time to be with us. And we hope to see you at another either webinar or experience or events, and we will get back to events as well. And no doubt if you're going to do the programs, then you'll see these lovely people during that experience. So thank you very much, all of you, and have a fantastic rest of the day and a lovely weekend. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye now.
Yeah.